more than half of the people that search for mental health have suffered some time of sexual abuse at a certain point. We are more interdependent than even ants. And at the same time, the quality of our relationships is probably what's most linked to our physical health, our mental health, and our happiness.
The title of your book, Condemned to Understand Each Other. Like, what a title. Arun Mansukhani is a clinical psychologist, sexologist, author, and public speaker from Spain.
Having lived through traumatic situations, one of the first and main consequences is going to be your self esteem, your self concept.
I just named it this emotional dependency that can form, that can be unhealthy. And I guess there's healthy dependency and unhealthy. What is emotional dependency? And it's time for a little pop quiz interruption. I'd like you please to guess, what is the percentage of people who are watching the content on this channel who have not subscribed? Are you ready? 97.5% have not subscribed. What? This blew my mind. That means only 2.5% of you have subscribed. Please help me change that. This makes a drastic impact on my capacity to continue sharing this educational content at no cost to you. All you have to do is press that subscribe button. If you have, thank you so much. Please continue sharing it with anyone you think can benefit from this. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Kasim Al-Mashat. I am so excited to share today's conversation with Arun Mansukhani, clinical psychologist and sexologist from Spain with specialized training in cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. He's also an EMDR Europe consultant and facilitator, and EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, a treatment for trauma and many other challenges that we may experience as humans. He's also a level 3 sensory motor therapy practitioner and a university specialist in clinical hypnosis. He is the director of Emotional Regulation Center in Malaga, specializing in trauma and attachment. By the way, his resume is so long. I'm just showing like a portion of it, everyone. So if you want to learn more, I'll put the link to his website. He has also delivered lectures and workshops at more than 30 national and international conferences. And in 2024, he served as an advisor to the European Commission Citizen Panel on Hate Crimes. I can only imagine what that was like. He is also the author of Condemned to Understand Each Other, which is such a great title we're going to explore. And he has a TEDx talk about emotional dependency. It's worth watching. Join us today, friends, as we explore a really important subject, relationships, and how we can understand each other as humans with all the complexities, including how the past impacts our present moment. So, first, a warm welcome to you to the Pause to Elevate podcast.
Hello, Kasim.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's late where you are in Spain, and really delighted to tap into your incredible depth of experience and knowledge. So, I wonder if we can begin with, how did you get interested in this field and trauma and all this deep work that you do? How did it all begin for you? What pulled you to this?
Okay, yeah, I started as a clinical psychologist, attending, like when you start, whoever knocks at your door, in a way, you just attend whatever comes your way. And one of the first things that probably surprised me when I'd been for some years working is the amount of clients that had moments that were somehow fixed in their, their memory, and that in a way kept on coming back and was causing the symptoms. Well, then later I understood, well, precisely these post-traumatic effects. Many of them had to do with sex, with sexual, aggressions, or with having been molested when they were children, etc. A very high percentage, as we know now. That a lot of, many of the, more than half of the people that search for mental health, for being attended in mental health, have suffered some time of sexual abuse at a certain point.
Mm.
So that really started making me, it sort of came in front of me. And at that time, I was a CBT trained therapist. That's my initial training. And
Mhm.
okay, so I would accompany them, try and identify negative thoughts and cognitive biases, and
Right.
somehow this was okay. It would help during a time, but definitely was not helping them long term.
Mm.
At least required a lot of effort. And that's when I started, looking for specialization in trauma therapy, and
Mhm.
that's part of the CV you just read has to do probably. I always say the CVs are as long as the level of insecurity of the person who has the. So I probably felt very insecure with my clients, and I just went on studying. And I've seen this happens to a lot of therapists. We just keep on and on.
We want to learn more modalities and more, keep
We
deeper.
never feel we control what nearly anything,
Yeah.
or so there's always so much to learn. And actually, that's how I started getting specialized in trauma. You can say
Mm.
it's my clients that took me in that direction.
Mm. It's so interesting as you're sharing how you got into it as well, how, it began with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is really effective. It's challenging unhelpful thoughts, but it's very cognitive. And I found the same. I do as well, CBT and EMDR. But there's a certain level of stuckness that seems to happen when we're not like diving deep into things from the past. So I'm wondering, what is trauma for those who maybe they're not even aware they've experienced trauma? What is trauma?
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. The thing is, cognitions affect emotions and can
Mm,
actually change the course of emotions when these emotions are not very intense. There's a certain
mm,
level of intensity that completely overrides the cognitive processes. We know this. There's a certain level of activation of, let's say, the amygdala that literally shuts off all the
mm,
cortical functioning. And we can experience this in our day to day life, right?
mm,
I mean, I may be angry at my brother, but not that angry. And my cognitions can actually, help me calm down, can
mhm.
dampen the amygdala that has to do with the emotion, and actually change the course. And this is cognitive therapy in essence, using your
Right.
cognitions in a way to calm down your emotions. But if someone comes with an axe and tries to attack me, my
Mm,
cognitions are going to get shut off completely. I'm going to literally react from a very emotional point. And
right.
in fact, I'll have the feeling, I'll have the sensation of acting before thinking. If someone
Mm,
comes and tries to attack me, you probably defend yourself or run away or I don't know, or collapse or whatever, but you don't actually think of what you're going to do. It just happens straight away. It becomes a reaction, not a response in that sense.
right.
So I think anybody can understand this and relate with this in our day to day life. I gave a probably bad example of someone with an axe. Probably has to do with
Mhm.
Jack Nicholson being there, and
A movie, Jack Nicholson
there.
movie.
But we can think of
Was
hundreds.
it? Are you thinking Shining? That older movie? Was it Shining?
Shining,
Yeah,
yeah. It was
yeah.
Jack Nicholson in Shining, I think, the axe. Okay,
Right.
but many other situations, driving or somebody gives you scares you, whatever.
Right.
Okay, so what is trauma? That was the question. Trauma, in a way, is any situation that was very overwhelming in its moment, very
Mm,
deregulating, probably is a more proper word,
mm,
that created an intense emotion, and for some reasons, that activation has not actually gone down. Okay, so the
mm,
mind has learned to avoid connecting with whatever reactivates that emotion,
mhm,
but there can be different things that can activate this in my mind.
mm,
And when any of these stimuli come up and it reactivates this high emotional state, I'll again go into this reactive state. This is
mm.
what we will call a trauma or post-traumatic response.
Right.
It's something that overwhelms me, deregulates my brain, makes me act from this very emotional point, is
Mm,
really actually shuts down my reasoning capacities, or hinders them quite a lot, and I just actually start reacting emotionally.
right.
So, and this is how we started understanding trauma. And the first way we thought about it was these very intense situations, wartime
Mm.
situations, etc. Again, going back to old movies, I
Mhm.
can think of Apocalypse Now, this fantastic scene.
Oh, yeah.
Martin Sheen sitting in the room, seeing the fan and getting all these flashbacks of the
Right.
helicopters. That's what we thought that trauma was at that time. PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. Very
Right.
extreme situations that had to do with life and death deregulated me at this very high level. And this is post traumatic.
Hmm.
But with time, what we learned is that we can be traumatized by many other situations, probably less intense,
Hmm.
and we realize less that it's affecting us. But these situations are functioning in a very similar manner. When again
Hmm.
this deregulation comes up and some stimuli connects and activates me, I'll start responding emotionally, maybe not being very conscious of what I'm responding to. And in any case,
Hmm.
this response will not be very adequate to the situation here and now, because it's
Right.
it's connected to what happened, God knows when. Now, and but
Hmm.
I'm yet reacting in the same situation now.
Hmm.
So in a way, we can, if you have to have a very simple way of understanding trauma, I would say trauma has to do with this, with deregulation, with situations where my brain
Hmm.
deregulates again, hyperactivates, or sometimes hypoactivates, disconnects.
Right.
And this doesn't have to do actually with a threat in the present, but it has to do with something I learned many years back, or I don't know, some time back. That
Hmm.
would be a post traumatic response. I don't know if
Right.
it's a very good answer, but
That's a very thorough answer in terms of like what actually something happens as you're describing it in the nervous system. So something happens in the nervous system that the part of the brain shuts down or goes offline, and there's the emotional part that keeps track of that, and people sometimes get triggered and overreact in the present. So I'm wondering, for some people, they may say, "Oh, well, I haven't experienced a war-related trauma, so I probably don't have trauma." So, what other examples do you have as well for folks who maybe they're dismissing traumas they've had because they don't consider a trauma? Like it could be rejection, it could be bullying, it could be like what do you see from your work or the research in terms of what you know? Let's call it the small t, right? That's referring. So I'm
yeah,
wondering what else.
yeah. This is how we understood trauma initially in the 80s. Trauma
Yes.
was part of psychology, psychiatry, mental health in the beginning. You can say psychology and psychiatry and mental health on the whole started with the study of trauma. We can
Mm,
go back to Salpetri and how all the initial studies in psychology had to do with trauma or psychiatry. Freud himself created, the theory of trauma initially, then he changed it.
mhm,
But then during many years, trauma disappeared from the investigation and from mainstream psychology. And
mm,
it didn't come back till probably the 80s after the Vietnam War, when all these veterans started coming back and came
right,
back to a country that probably was, now predisposed to understand that these people were disturbed and had a real problem. It was not just that they were, cowards or whatever. That's what probably you
right.
said before. And that's when we started talking about PTSD. So probably that's the first idea we get about what a trauma is, and people
Mm,
can understand that. And then this went on becoming extended. The first natural extension was women that had gone through gender violence. And what
right.
they started seeing is that many women that had gone through the same situations presented some of the symptoms that probably war veterans had. And the
Mm,
next step was clearly children that had been beaten by their parents or ill treated by
right.
their parents. Okay. But then we started understanding a bit more, even more. All right.
Mm,
And this is the first division I think that was very interesting, is that all this we've just talked about, we could, uh, group it under the term action trauma.
mhm.
This
Action trauma.
yeah. Okay, or commission trauma. We use any of them.
Mhm.
And this means things that happen to you that should have not happened to you,
Right.
or things you heard, or things that you saw that you should have not heard, you should have not seen. This is commission trauma or action trauma. Okay, and
Mhm.
this is all the examples we've just given have to do with this. But then we have omission trauma. And this is really important. This is
Mm,
the next big step in our understanding of trauma. And omission trauma is exactly, it fits into the description of trauma because children are born with certain basic, very basic needs. And if
mm,
these needs are not fulfilled, these children feel insecure and get deregulated. In a very similar way, I won't say exactly in the same way, but in a very similar way as they would get deregulated if something bad was happening to them. But actually, here,
Mm,
probably nothing bad is happening, just that their basic needs of being cared for, being seen, being loved, are not being fulfilled. But this
mm,
is creating in them the same deregulation, because children have this very basic need
mm.
of human contact, of being taken care of. And when
Right.
this need is not fulfilled, their brain starts getting deregulated. And again, I think nearly everybody can relate to this. If you
Mhm,
take care of children, or if you don't pay attention to them, they start getting deregulated. Okay.
mhm,
So this opened up an entire new group of traumas that we had not taken into account before, that had to do with things that didn't happen that should have happened.
right.
This is the basic omission trauma. And this
Yeah,
opened up to neglect, to not being taken care of, to not
right.
being loved, or things that you didn't see, like you didn't see love between your parents. And this can be, or you didn't see your parents happy. And again, this we know is very deregulating for a child.
Mhm.
And what we started seeing is that the consequences, the long term consequences, were similar to what we would see in
Mm,
people that had gone through commission trauma. So that's why we started understanding it as part of the same. And probably the last aspect that's come into trauma. So we have these
mhm,
two big groups, but the last group has to do with what we loosely, talk about when we talk about relational trauma.
mm,
Okay, what we just talked about, omission, has a lot to do with attachment, and relational trauma has to do completely with attachment.
mm,
So what is relational trauma? So what we know is that the relationships the child sees and has during his first years or his childhood form a
mm.
sort of template of what type of relationships that child is going to find normal as it when he
Right.
becomes an adult, and what positions he's going to occupy, what type of interpersonal strategies he's going to use. All these things are
Mm,
learned at a very implicit level, and they are learned in these initial years of the child, and this creates the relational patterns that the child is going to function by the rest of his life. So if these
mm,
relational patterns were not uh, healthy patterns, this can create what we call relational trauma. That's
mhm,
functioning under patterns that are not the correct patterns, and considering that this is the normal way of functioning in adult relationships. And
mm,
it's very close to omission trauma, but it's a bit more than that. So probably in these three blocks, as I think we could summarize all
mm,
what we understand about trauma right now.
mm. See, this is so insightful as you're sharing it, because I think many people may have not recognized that they've experienced omission trauma or relational trauma. And, many people think of just, oh, nothing bad really happened and I should be fine. And I don't know why I'm, getting so upset so quickly or
Yeah, but
reacting to things.
there's a very important thing here, Kasim, that
Yeah.
action trauma, commission trauma
Hmm.
is much easier to recall. Right?
Right.
Omission trauma is nearly impossible to identify and nearly impossible to recall. And the same with relational trauma. If I was a kid, I probably will remember the evening that my father came back drunk and, I don't know, insulted me. This is
Mhm.
something we know that you can dissociate this information, but if there's no active process, it's something I can quite easily remember
Right.
and quite easily understand that this is not correct and this must have affected me in some way. But
Mm.
to remember and to identify that my mother was slightly depressed, or maybe
Mhm.
moderately depressed, since I was born till I was 4 years, and this resulted in her not having enough eye contact with me, not picking me enough.
Right.
This is impossible to to identify and impossible to remember. And the same thing happens with relational trauma, because precisely
Mm.
these first relations are the one that establish in my mind what is normal. The child thinks that what
Right.
finds around him is normal. That's how human brains have evolved. That's the reason why we adapt to
Mhm.
such different cultural environments, because we grow up in an environment and we feel that this is the normal way of functioning.
This is how it is.
This
Yeah.
is how it is. This is how it's supposed to be. This is the normal. So
Mm.
this is the actual problem with the relational traumas. It's much even more difficult to identify,
Mm.
and I just feel I'm doing the normal thing, the thing that's supposed to be done. This is how things are. And I may be, acting in a very toxic way or responding in a very toxic way, or sometimes looking for a very toxic relationship because that's what I feel. That's what makes me feel
Mm.
actually, I don't know, at home, probably. Sadly.
Right, because similar to the patterns in childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess if someone is stuck and maybe if they've done some work, some counseling work, and if they still feel stuck or have not done any work, um, like they can't identify something, but they're really struggling in relationship or getting activated or reactive to things. How would you work with them? These, kind of identifying these, the relational aspects of trauma or the omission trauma.
Okay. The first thing we would work on, and this is a very general summary, probably, but we always like to start with what is most symptomatic in the person's life now. What is
Right.
actually creating difficulties now? Because if our hypothesis is correct, and there is a post-traumatic effect, we first have to find that effect. And this is
Mhm.
important because probably all the modern trauma therapies are different than the ones that were a few years back, because they don't have this in-depth search of childhood from the beginning to the end, but we actually start from what is being problematic now.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's creating troubles now, and is your response adequate to whatever problems you're encountering? If your response is
Mm.
not adequate, why is that? Why is this
Mm.
response that may be, being very effective when someone starts shouting, for example,
Mm.
or I don't know, or have some relational patterns that constantly keep on leading me to different situations or
Mhm.
different relationships that I'm not happy with, and try and understand whether my response is adequate to what's happening now. And if it's not,
Right.
where did I start learning this response? Okay, where did this start?
Mm.
When did I start responding in this way? And what was
Mm.
happening around there? And that's how we slowly start connecting backwards to try and see where does whatever we see now, where did it start? Where does it come from? Okay.
Mhm.
And I would say we have two big divisions.
Mm.
One has to do with the symptoms that have to do directly with whatever happened. Uh,
Mhm.
for example, I tend to get anxious, very, very anxious in situations where where my chief, for example, is angry with me. Okay, so this would be a
Mhm.
direct response. Where does anxiety start? And probably we can trace this back to moments
Mhm.
of anxiety when I was a child. Or I
Right.
tend to feel very anxious when I'm alone. And we probably say, okay, do you remember being alone as a child? And many times,
Mm.
slowly but slowly, the person will start recuperating. These are the direct symptoms of what
Right.
happened then. And then we have other group of symptoms that have to do with the strategies I started using to cope with whatever difficult environments I was facing as a child, and
Mm.
how those strategies are yet functioning today and probably creating a lot of problems. And these strategies can be very different. For example, I've developed an extremely avoidant personality. So as soon as someone gets close, I tend to avoid and break away. And this is more
Mm.
strategy. Or
So
I,
protective. So maybe something helped in the past.
yes,
It had a function then, but it's getting in the way of things now.
it's completely getting in the way. It had a function then,
Mm.
probably because the child didn't have many options then. And
Mm.
maybe it was becoming caregiving or becoming extremely self reliant. And that's
Right.
what I yet constantly keep on doing in the present. And this is not a direct symptom, I would say, of what happened then. It's
Mm.
more all the strategies I developed to cope with that situation, and that now form part of what I consider my personality. But that
Mhm.
actually is bringing me a lot of problems, and
Yeah.
many times relational problems. So again, here we can try and identify, where did I learn to behave like this?
Mhm.
Understand the strategy, and many times start uncovering the more direct symptoms that are kept, out of the way precisely because I yet respond with the strategy I used to respond then. So
Mhm.
I don't connect with being lonely because I'm a tremendous caregiver. So I'm
Mm.
caring constantly for people, and this is a way of keeping my basic, fear of loneliness
Right.
But at the same time, this has a huge cost in my adult relationships because I
Mm.
don't have healthy relationships, adult to adult. I'm sort of becoming, the parents, and this is unsatisfactory for the adults I'm relating with, and extremely unsatisfactory for me because
Mm.
I'm constantly taken care of, not being taken care of. And so, this takes us to the what we call vertical relationships. That's not what we expect with two adults. We expect
Mm.
horizontal relationships, more balanced relationships. But many people
Mm.
keep on working from these strategies and they have a lot of difficulties of positioning themselves in horizontal relationships. They
Mm.
never learned how to do this.
Can you say a little more about vertical versus horizontal? Because you know what you're really pinpointing is there's unmet needs from childhood, and these unmet needs and traumas that happen lead us to behave in certain patterns. And some of these patterns helped us in the past, whether it's avoiding, whether it's becoming a caretaker, like over caring in a way can be suffocating. But then they persist and interfere later in life. They kind of affect us in having healthier relationship, intimate relationships, maybe struggling with our family, maybe struggling with at work, with even strangers, perhaps, right? So, what is it? Can you say a little more about this vertical versus horizontal?
Yes.
Um,
The first thing you just mentioned, I think, is really interesting, is that these unmet needs that we had as
mm,
children uh, will never get satisfied in adult relationships unless we
mm,
manage to position ourselves in an adult state. This is really important, I would say, because
mm,
many people are trapped up in the unmet needs of they had as children, expecting the adult relationships now to give them what they didn't have
um,
then, and this is not going to happen. In a way, it's a post-traumatic effect in which I don't accept what happened, and I'm in a way always hoping that's going to happen in a different way.
mm,
Okay, so I think this is something that's really important for people to understand. For me to be able to, in a way, solve whatever unmet needs I had as a child, I
mhm,
have to be able to connect with the adult state and relate with other adults in an adult way. Okay,
mm,
while I'm from my unmet needs, adult relationships are going to be unsatisfactory. They can never have the level of unconditional love that the relationships we should have had with our parents. This level
right.
is impossible, absolutely impossible. Okay, so this leads me to horizontal and vertical
Mm,
relationships, and we can think about this in very simple terms. Vertical relationship. This
mhm,
has to do mainly with power,
mm,
and people don't like to talk about power when you talk about intimate relationships, but power is
right.
a central thing, whether we like it or not. So we call a vertical relationship a relationship when out of two people, one person has, we would say, nearly all the power, and the other person doesn't have any power.
Ah, yes. So you have a pen in your hand. Those of you who are just listening on the podcast, you have a pen
Yeah.
and you're pointing to the top of the pen as
Okay.
the pen is horizontal, and yes,
Exactly.
and
Correct.
the bottom. Yeah.
So if we think about just a vertical line, we can think about a top and a bottom, and this has to do with power. But power connects with responsibility,
Mm,
probably the capacity of taking decisions, the capacity of ending the relationship. The person who has the power has all this.
mhm,
Probably has to take more care or protect more, etc. So we always say that the ideal or most healthy vertical relationship is the one between a baby, a newly born baby, and a caretaker. This
mhm.
is a completely vertical relationship
Right.
where one of the parts has all the power and the other part has literally none.
Mm.
Okay, and it can be perfectly healthy
Yeah, that's
because
needed actually. Yeah.
it's needed, exactly. This
Yeah,
is
yeah.
really interesting because sometimes if we have horizontal relationships too early in a child's life, this is going to create problems because the child is not prepared
Ah.
for that. But in a way, and to sort of make a long story short, we can say
Mhm.
that growing up has to do partly with this relationship that started being vertical. It starts getting each time starts becoming each time more and more horizontal, so start switching towards the
Mm.
horizon, and probably maturing and growing up has to do with this, or this is a simple way of talking about that.
Mhm.
In opposition to vertical relationships, in horizontal relationships, and now we can think about a straight line
Right.
in a horizontal position, both the members of the relationship are on the same level, they have the same level of
Mm.
power, both take care and are taken care of. So they have to have this capacity, the capacity of taking
Mhm.
care and of allowing the other person to take care of them. Both of them have the possibility of ending the relationship or not.
Mhm.
They have the
So two
same
equals.
point. They're working as equals. And this is the
Mhm.
ideal relationship between adults, friends, couples, probably. This is
Mhm.
what we're looking for. In fact, there's
Mhm.
a British sociologist, Anthony Giddens. He's got a beautiful book
Mhm.
about intimacy. And he says that the true intimacy is not possible unless we have a horizontal relationship.
Mm.
Okay, this is a very interesting idea because the true intimacy is when I open up to someone, taking the risk of that person
Mhm.
deciding not to open up, but that person then decides, having the complete possibility not to do so, to open up to me and really connect with me, and risk at the same time the other
Mhm.
person is also risking being rejected or whatever. And this is the true intimacy. Okay, so I think this idea is
Mm.
very interesting because you get someone that's an equal, and you're having a relationship with an equal. Okay,
Yeah.
so we have to have been able to do this transition. What happens? Horizontal relationships are going to actually activate all our fears in intimacy.
Mm.
Okay, fear of not being good enough, fear of not being corresponded, fear of being rejected, fear of
Mm.
being having made fun of, fear of someone being a traitor and doing something really horrible to us.
Yeah. Betrayal. And
Because we don't have power, we don't have control, we are on a complete
mm.
equal level. Okay,
Mm.
so if my past history, and this has to do with traumas that we just defined,
Mhm. Yeah.
has led me to have a higher level of fears and intimacy, for me it'll be impossible to have a horizontal relationship. It'll be too frightening. Okay, I'll start, and we said it's a sort of activation, and I'll start
Mhm.
feeling that I'm not loved, that I'm not good enough, that the other person is mocking me, making fun of me, that the other person is actually
Mm.
not in love, whatever my history has predisposed me, you can say, to think, is what will start
Mhm.
getting activated. So these people will find it so tough to be in horizontal relationships, but at the same time, they yet will have this strong need of intimacy. And
Mm.
how do I get close if I'm so afraid? So the only way is to unbalance the relationship and make it a
Mm.
bit more vertical instead of horizontal. In
Mhm.
that
So,
way,
so, so, so what was familiar in the past.
exactly. So I'll take it to
Yeah.
what is familiar in the past, and that's one of the reasons. But at the same time, I have more control now, and
Right.
this lessens my fear. And this may be actually becoming a dominant person, and treating
Mm.
badly the other person, and I have the sense of superiority, or exactly the opposite, becoming someone that's very frail and needs to be taken care of, or becoming a great
Mm.
caretaker, or whatever of these
Right.
strategies that all have in common that they are not horizontal, that they are vertical.
Mm.
But at the same time, as Anthony Giddens warned us, these
Mhm.
relationships are unsatisfactory for
Right.
everybody involved. So they become sort of a trap for a relationship
Mhm.
that's not satisfying my needs, that's not satisfying my childhood unmet needs that can't be met now unless
Yeah.
I, come up to this more adult stance. And at the same time, it creates this sort of addictive relationship. And this is what we see in most of
Mm.
dependency or, conflictive, toxic partnerships are these dynamics.
Mhm. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to quickly thank you for stopping by and watching this content. It truly means the world to me that you're interested in creating positive change. I also want to invite you to join our amazing community. I have free events online about mindfulness, mindfulness based stress reduction, laughter, as well as retreats that you can do from the comfort of your own home. And are you ready for this? Self paced program that you can do about mindfulness and stress reduction. So you can join the newsletter below to stay up to date on all these goodies. And if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and press that button. It really helps me to keep this content going and reach out to more guests. Thank you so much again, and may you continue enjoying watching this episode. It's actually exactly what I wanted to ask you as well, is you just named it, this dependency, this emotional dependency that can form, that can be unhealthy. And I guess there's healthy dependency and unhealthy. Can you speak a little bit about what is emotional dependency in
Yeah,
relationship?
yeah, this is a great debate, I would say. And I would say emotional dependency is something completely normal, completely healthy, and something that we actually want to happen. Uh, Emotional dependency is that my emotions depend not only on what happens to me, but on what happens to you, on what you think, on whatever is happening in your life. That's when I become
Mm,
emotionally dependent to you. And this is completely natural between human beings. Okay, in
mm,
fact, we two are slightly more emotionally dependent on each other than 2 or 3 weeks back before meeting each other. I mean, if tomorrow someone tells you, hey, Arun Mansukhani died last night, you'll be
mm.
quite affected.
Yes.
If they had told you a month before, hey, a psychologist in Malaga known and called Arun Mansukhani died, you would have said, okay, sad, but what
S-
does that have to do
Yeah.
with me? So even this
Mm,
short interaction has created
mm.
this slight emotional dependence between us. And this is
Right.
completely normal and it's fantastic. In fact,
Hmm.
if someone told you tomorrow, hey, Arun Mansukhani died last night, and you didn't feel anything, you would start getting worried.
Right.
Kind
Kind
of
of
extreme
disconnect,
avoidance,
numbness. Yeah.
or maybe a bit psychopathic. I don't know. You'll have to see.
Yeah.
Could be one of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing we have to realize that it's completely normal and
Mm,
it's healthy and it's what we want to happen. It's probably what prevents us from being extremely cruel to each other. It's
mm,
what makes us take care of our children. Why do we take care of our children? I always say children are, fantastic parasites that make you very happy, but they're parasites. They actually take a lot of your time, a lot of your resources. I've got two
mm.
fantastic parasites at home,
You
17
do.
and 15. And that is when you actually realize how parasites they are. But
Mm,
you're totally emotionally connected to them, and their happiness is your happiness. And this is what makes us take care of our kids, be helpful
mm,
with each other. So emotional dependency is a good thing.
I guess even something I'll come back to ask you about after made me think of pets, like connection to pets, and
Yeah, exactly.
attachments and dependency. Yeah.
It's very
Hmm.
interesting because all the examples we've given, including pets, the connection with our children, the connection with our friends, and the connection with
Mm.
the pets have to do with the same hormone, with oxytocin.
Ah.
So it's really interesting. Oxytocin is and vasopressin lesser level, but these two are the two hormones that are responsible for partly for all this connection feeling and feeling connected,
Mm,
even with pets. And since 4 years, we know that even the brain of the dogs, when they look at their master's eyes,
mm,
starts producing oxytocin. So even they are connected. They have a
mm,
similar feeling probably to us when they look at us. So this is interesting. This emotional dependency that's healthy,
yeah.
normal, fantastic, and that prevents us from being psychopathic creatures
Yeah.
that just think about themselves and don't care about anybody else. All right.
Mm,
Okay. So when does it start becoming bad? And this, to make it again, to make a long story short, has to do probably with what we just talked about, with the
mm.
possibility of having these horizontal relationships, vertical relationships, or not.
Right.
Okay, so we would call it a pathological dependence when the person can't stay in horizontal relationships and gets trapped in these relationships that are,
Mm,
tending to verticalize, is feeling bad about them, doesn't feel good about what's happening, is not happy with how they're
right.
treating him or how you are treating the other person, or probably both, and yet can't break away from that relationship.
Mm,
And what we know is that these dynamics are very addictive. So many times when you fall in them, it's literally and your brain functions as an addict to these toxic dynamics, and you sort of start getting each time more and more trapped in them.
mm. So people get more hooked to certain patterns in relationship, and it's addicting.
Yes, yes. The
Mm,
dynamics of fighting and again making up.
mm,
This is intermittent reinforcement. This is basically how addiction functions. Okay, so I have good, bad, and I start getting hooked on to these moments where I have all the positive
mm,
uh, I have all the oxytocin and all the serotonin and all these things rushing into my brain, and this is such a pleasurable sensation that I get hooked onto it. And again, when the
mm,
person breaks away, I have this lack of all of these, and I start again looking for that, and that's how I start connecting, and we create this sort of toxic uh, addictive
mm.
pattern. There are other 5 or 6 reasons. This is the most simple one. Okay, the others
Mhm.
are going a bit more into complicated complicated explanation.
Yeah.
But we can say that it has this addictive pattern. Exactly, the toxic relationships function
Mhm.
in a very similar way to an addiction.
Mhm. It's helping me better understand even the title of your book, and I wonder if you can say a little bit about that. This condemned to understand each other. Like,
Yeah.
what a title! So there's something about what brought on that title, and
Okay.
yeah.
This has to go a bit with my personal history. I'm from India,
Hmm.
and my parents are my mother comes from a family that's much closer to Buddhism.
Hmm.
Okay, and Buddhism talks about a lot about detachment,
Hmm.
non-attachment, being detached. Okay, I'm
Right.
not going to criticize Buddhism. Obviously, not. It's not that, but probably detachment, not properly understood, can lead to
Right.
these slightly distance relationships. So it's something that always, was there in the back of my mind. It's something I
Hmm.
heard as a child, and I always kept on wondering about this. And well, as I started growing up, started reading, understanding, and what I finally realized, and this is nothing new. I mean, entire science now is talking about this, is that probably what has made us humans is the capacity to connect and the need to depend on each other. And we
Mm.
now know that probably everything, or this has been one of the main driving forces in our evolution as a species. What makes us a really successful species is this
Hmm.
capacity of cooperating and of interdepending on each other.
Right.
We are an extremely dependent species. We are extremely
Mhm.
interdependent. Among the super predators, we are a super predator, probably the most
Mhm.
successful species among the predators right now. Uh, Lions, there are about 20, 30,000 lions in the world, most of them because we take care of them, humans.
Right.
Chimpanzees are about 250,000, and we are 8,000 million. So, like, there's no comparison. We are
Yeah.
extremely successful. And if you compare us to them, we are much weaker. And like, if you lock me up with a lion or a chimpanzee, we
Yeah.
know who's going to win. So,
Yeah.
what
Even
makes
yeah.
so
Both of us in the same cage against one of them.
we don't have
No.
anything to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what made us so successful? And this is not a new idea. This was
Mm.
already, you know, uh, talked about by Charles Darwin. And
Mm.
he was at least one of the first people I read that said that actually the main reason for us being such a successful species is that we cooperate, interdepend, and work with each other. Our brain
Mm.
is evolved because of this. We know that now. That what actually makes the brain grow is the number of the members of a group and how you have to relate with them and remember who's your friend and who's not, etc.
Right.
Okay, so whatever. This makes us the most dependent species on planet Earth, and this is a
Mm.
fact right now. We are more interdependent than even ants and bees, much more. We, in a way, have formed nearly a global community where
Yeah.
everybody's connected with everybody. Okay, so we are so interdependent, and at the same time, the quality of our relationships is probably what's most linked to our physical health, our mental health, and
Mm.
our happiness. We know this, from the Oxford study in adult development. The thing that best predicts
Mhm.
your physical and mental health when you're 70 is the quality of your relationships when you're 50. It's not the only predictor, but it's the best above any other
Mm.
predictor, about your levels of cholesterol, about whether you smoke or not. This is the best, not the only, but the best predictor.
So the quality of relationship in terms of intimate or just the
Both.
qualities of friendships and networks and
Both what we call
Mhm.
the intimate relationships, but also the wider scale relationships. Both of them have a deep, profound effect on our physical and mental health.
Mm.
And this is precisely because we are such a dependent species. Okay, so
Right.
summarizing all of this, we are condemned to understand each other, you know. And in Spanish, the title is phrased in a way that it can mean condemned to understand each other or condemned to understand myself. Both are said with the same phrase. So that's also the basic idea behind. We have to understand each other, and to understand each other and be able to relate with each other, I have to also try and understand myself and connect with myself before I can connect.
Mm.
So
Mm.
that's more or less what I was looking for with this type.
Yeah, because it has a component of taking responsibility for our own journey
Yeah.
in relationship. And none of this, as you're speaking, I just wanted to, it's kind of obvious in your work, but just to state it, this is not saying something externally happening that's, you know, abusive or negative. Oh, it's just about me doing my own work. It's saying, there's external things that bad things happen, yes, but now that it has happened, how I deal with it is my responsibility, and how I deal with it is going to affect my current life. It's not about good or bad about what happened in the past. Is how am I going to deal with it to improve and transform my life now? I
Yeah.
think that's what
What
potential.
can I
That's, I
do?
mean, that's healing.
Yeah, and what can I do? I mean, I can't
Yeah.
control what other people do. So it makes
Right.
much more sense to start from where I can start doing something. And it's not
Yeah.
denying anything, as you say. It's but okay, what happens now? What can I do? And start
Yeah.
responding instead of reacting.
Yeah.
And this again links us to trauma because when you are under that heavy activation, you are not responding. You're not thinking. You're just
Right.
reacting.
Yes. And I guess, this is where EMDR comes in, and other interventions that really support working with the nervous system, processing sensory on a sensory level as well. For those who are not familiar with EMDR, like, what is it and why does it work?
Okay, why does it work? We don't know yet, but that's nothing to be worried about. We yet don't know how antidepressant drugs work exactly. In fact,
Right.
serotonin theory is now quite under fire, depending. But in any case, it's not infrequent that something works
Mhm.
and we don't know yet exactly 100% how does it work. All right, so
Right.
we don't know exactly how it works, but we do know what it does, and it's not the only therapy that
Right.
deals with trauma right now. Because what we started realizing as we started understanding trauma better is how pervasive trauma is in life,
Mm.
and how trauma is connected to a lot of different conditions that we didn't think were connected to trauma before. So, at the same time, all these different therapies have developed sensory motor, CBT therapies focused on trauma, and
Mm.
they most of all of them have in common, I would say, a certain degree of re experiencing with the therapist what happened then, recalling what
Mm.
happened, and allowing yourself to feel what happened then, and then some techniques that help regulate, down regulate that activation. So, in
Right.
a way, the brain learns that it's no more in that danger zone. Okay,
Mm.
without beyond words, because words are not going to do the work for you. So
Right.
we have all these other ways of doing it. And yeah, I've worked with sensory motor a lot. I've worked with CBT focused trauma therapy, and I
Mhm.
work with EMDR. And I do feel EMDR is the most effective and the most protocolized. So it has common things with these other interventions, but probably it
Mhm.
adds something extra that has to do plus with the bilateral stimulation. And again, we don't know exactly why bilateral stimulation helps. We have three different hypotheses, but it helps. What
Mhm.
we do
This is
know
the eye movement. Of those who are not, they're not familiar with it. The bilateral stimulation is someone keeping their head straight, and the
and moving
therapist
the
is,
eyes,
yeah,
or you
moving the
can do
eyes left
something
to
with
right,
sounds,
or
or
sounds.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and there's
basically
something. Yeah.
stimulating your brain, simulating alternatively each of the hemispheres of the brain, giving a stimuli to the left, then to the right, to the left, to the right, while the person is connecting with the memory,
Yeah.
again in a fast and simple way. And this somehow has this effect of helping clients process. We call that, that's what we the term we use,
Mhm.
process these memories in a way that they stop having this traumatic effect. I mean, after the intervention, they stop having the capacity of
Mm.
deregulating, and they start becoming memories, actually. I mean,
Right.
I remember that for not good will probably never be good, and many times probably be an awful memory, but an awful memory that doesn't deregulate me anymore, that doesn't
Right.
condition my behavior. Okay.
So yeah, it doesn't have a charge, and sometimes people worry like, "Oh, I don't want to lose that memory. I don't want to forget about it."
That's
So
not
you're
going to
not
happen.
going to forget it with this work. It's removing the charge, so it's not activating in the moment.
And
So
some
it's
people are
not.
also afraid of becoming
Yeah.
indifferent to the memory. How can I be
Right.
indifferent to my father beating my mother or whatever? No, no,
Right.
I always say it's never going to be a good memory. Don't worry. It's always going to be a bad
Right.
or really awful memory, because I guess it's awful to remember your father. But one thing
Right.
is awful, and one thing is that it, again deregulates you here and now
Right.
till a point that you actually are not, you don't, you're not deciding what to do. So, okay, this is a bad memory, and
Yeah.
think about it, it's not happy at all, but it doesn't, it no longer, connects me emotionally at that level that makes me act.
Yeah.
And
You
definitely we
know,
can lose the memory, nothing of that sort.
I find often people get surprised of
Yeah.
how the charge goes down. They really get surprised, and even and, many people are like, I don't like, is this gonna really work? Like, I don't know. Let's see. And then people get really surprised often of like, oh, I don't understand why, but that like when even I bring up that memory from the past, I don't feel heat in my body, or my heart doesn't start racing. I don't start feeling angry. Like it's just a memory. It's just something in the past. You know?
What's always been surprising for me, and it happened to you, being plus coming from CBT background,
Yeah.
is how once the activation goes down, the brain starts producing these new cognitions that are,
Mm.
extremely adaptive, fantastic, logical, adult, and they sort of just come up in the client's
Yeah.
mind. And I always used to think initially, I said, God, if I try to, convince this person of what he's now saying with this, with this conviction of this, how long would I have taken with
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know, 6 years to try and convince the person to say this. And it's
Yeah.
fantastic how once plus, once this emotion starts going down, how the brain, yeah, it starts functioning, and really puts that memory in its place,
Yeah.
and thinks about it in such a clear manner, such a logical manner. It's surprising.
Mm.
Yet surprising.
And believing these new, more helpful thoughts,
Exactly.
like whether I'm lovable, or I'm worthy, I deserve good things, or whatever
And
beliefs, like
actually believing, you can see
actually believing it, because
it's not something
yeah,
they're forcing themselves to think. It's
right.
actually coming down up, right?
That's really important, because otherwise it becomes something people layer, and they're like, they don't really believe, like, oh, I'm worthy, or I'm lovable, or I can succeed. Don't really believe it, but they keep repeating it to themselves. They don't really
Yeah. But
believe
that's
it.
exhausting.
But this,
And sooner or
yeah,
later
yeah,
they
yeah.
get tired of doing that. It's like, I don't know, going to the gym. You have to keep on going. Otherwise you
Yeah,
lose
yeah,
muscle. And it's something like that. They have to keep on doing it. And with these other techniques, thankfully. Yeah, before discovering EMDR and all these other, I thought that was the maximum we could do. I literally, thought that's the
Mm.
maximum we could do. Help people cope with situations, and but actually not change anything deep inside. So for me, it was a
Right.
classic surprise to see that no, that we
Yeah.
could do a lot more than that.
Yeah. It really is surprising. I mean, this is one of the things for me why I train in EMDR, because I experienced it, and as a client, and I was like, "Ooh, this actually," and I often like to try something before believing it. So I'm like, "Oh no, this actually has helped," and it was a traumatic event that happened, and wow, like even right now, I bring it up in my mind. It's just like, yeah, it just happened. But it's quite amazing how
Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So if someone is listening to this, and maybe thinking, wait, I might need to do some work, reach out to wherever you are locally, wherever you're listening to this. If there's jurisdiction issues around licensing, so you need to work with someone in your region, but you can look up in your region, someone who's trained, um, something to consider, because change is possible, and these things can heal.
Yeah. Deep.
And it doesn't mean years and years. Sometimes people think, is this like psychoanalysis? I'm going to do 20 years of work before EMDR or work. No. But yeah.
Yeah, this is very important. What you're saying, we don't have this, complete revision of everything that happened in your childhood and it meant to you. And this is okay. Whoever wants to do
Yeah.
this, it's fantastic. It's probably a different objective you're looking for. No, no, we start from what's actually problematic. That's what we're looking for post
Right.
traumatic effects. That's
Right.
where, and we hook onto that effect, and that's what we try and connect with your past, and
Yeah.
that's the part of the past we're interested in, not the rest.
Yes, yes. And there's a current thing that's happening that you
Yeah.
named earlier. It's a current target. Something's bugging me now, and then we find where it is related. Suganest, who I trained with EMDR, she uses the metaphor I still use with clients. It's like we're opening a filing cabinet. We're taking one file that's bothering you right now. It's not like we're opening all drawers in the filing cabinet and we're throwing everything on the floor. that's flooding. like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
taking one file, we're processing it, putting it right back in the filing cabinet, and closing it. Yeah.
That's a very good metaphor. I totally agree with it. Yeah. I
Yeah.
also tell my clients many times, they may have told you EMDR works with the past, but it actually works with the present. Well, we're
Yeah.
interested in the part of your past that's yet having effects in your present. That's what we're interested in. So in the end, are working actually with your present, and we are working with this memory from your past because it's yet active in your present.
Yes, it's alive now. That's why.
Exactly. Otherwise,
Right.
we would not dedicate our time to this. It's alive now. It's having effects now, and it's affecting you in your life today. That's why we work
Yeah.
with
Yeah. I just have a. This has been so fascinating, interesting, and I feel like I got at least another hour of questions for you, but I know we're getting close to the end. So there's two things I'm still really curious about. And I know you speak about it, importance of boundary setting and self-esteem. How do they interact? Why are boundaries helpful in relationships?
it. Okay, and this again has to do with trauma, so it's
Mm,
connected. First of all, trauma. The probably the most important effect of trauma is what the trauma says about myself, tells me about myself.
mm,
And this is very counterintuitive because the trauma actually doesn't say anything about me. It's just, something that happened to me. It has to do with luck, with chance, with where I was born, with
mm,
the street I was walking by. But we know that this doesn't function like that.
right.
Anybody that goes through a traumatic experience blames himself or herself for having experienced that uh,
Mm,
situation, and the person's self esteem automatically goes down. And this will happen in any type of trauma, literally any time, even if someone just hits me on the street. But if it
mm,
happens with closer people, then the effect is much bigger. And if it
right.
happens when I was a child, the effect is much bigger. Okay, and there are different reasons. In fact, there's six different reasons that
Mm,
explain why a victim blames himself or herself. But we won't say the reasons. No time for that. Just believe me. But I think everybody can understand how that's the
mm,
effect. So, having lived through traumatic situations, one of the first and main consequences is going to be your self-esteem, your self-concept.
mm,
Okay, and now the boundaries I put to other people have to do with this. If I have a balanced, adult, correct self concept, I can put these correct boundaries because these boundaries plus have to be flexible because we have the need to
mhm,
defend ourselves from other people, from being harmed, but we have this deep need to connect. So
mm,
our boundaries have to have this flexibility. And that's what an adult learns to do through these healthy relationships during childhood.
mm.
So a person that's gone through traumatic experiences probably has not learned how to set these boundaries, but apart from that, has this basic self-esteem problem that makes him or her not put correct boundaries. Either they are too
Mm,
rigid and don't let anyone get close, or
mm.
exactly the opposite in this quest for being loved and being accepted and
So pleasing,
yeah,
like people
exactly.
pleasing.
I can
Mm.
literally not distinguish what's not correct, what's not adequate
Mm.
in the relationship, and don't have correct. So this is how it links with trauma. This is where it comes from, and it's essential at the same time to be able to have healthy adult relationships that we just said are the
Mm.
reason that connects most connected to our mental health, physical health, and happiness. So
Mm.
we're not talking about something minor. We're talking about
Right.
probably one of the most important aspects of our lives. And
Mm.
when I don't have when I have this low self esteem and I don't have a capacity for setting healthy boundaries, I'm definitely not going to have healthy adult relationship.
Right.
And this is going to sort of recreate and deepen the problem and deepen the traumatic experiences and create this vicious cycle.
Mm.
Escape. And at the same time, probably even if someone healthy comes across, I won't be able to connect with this person. We said before, if I'm looking for this
Right.
vertical relationship, someone that's offering me something horizontal is literally too frightening. Or I don't
Mm.
even identify it as love. Probably, I think this is not love.
Mhm.
Love is something more possessive or whatever.
Right.
Okay, so this is how it connects, and that's why we have to work a lot with our clients many times, initially in the initial stages, with
Mm.
boundaries. Uh,
Right.
so we stop, traumatic events, maybe lower level traumatic events, but traumatic events to
Mm.
keep on happening in their day to day, in their today. So we many times start from there, helping them
Mm.
uh, create these boundaries and create healthy boundaries, flexible, healthy boundaries.
Mm. So it's something that can be learned, even though someone may have spent a lifetime of unhealthy boundaries or pleasing or
Yeah,
just connect. Yeah. So,
it's something that was learned,
right.
so it can be relearned. If it
Right.
was learned at an implicit level, we talk about implicit learning when nobody actually intentionally maybe taught us anything, but we learned it anyway.
You
And
learned it anywhere. Yeah. Yeah.
implicit learning is the most important part of our learning. So all these relational patterns are completely implicit, but they are
Yeah.
learned patterns, because I learn the patterns according to the culture I grow up in. So
Yeah.
we know that. So it's learned. So as it was learned once, we can decodify them in a way that we have to
Yeah.
decodify them now, and now probably in a more explicit form learn them and make them implicit again. Make them part of my natural way of function.
Bring a lot of awareness, consciousness to
Yes.
it. Yeah. It's interesting you were saying earlier about, talking about self worth. And, as a child, I often remind people that when something happens to us, and a child's mind doesn't have the capacity as the adult. So, the first thing we often seem to go to is, well, it's my fault. Even if something happened externally that it's not our fault and we blame ourselves or whatever might have happened. So that affects the sense of self-worth, like, oh, it's my fault, I don't deserve things. Because how else would a child make sense of it? Like idealizing adults and parents or guardians, and then something bad happens, well, it must be my fault then. Do you see that as well?
Yes. Yes. And I said
Yeah.
there were six reasons and too long to
Right.
explain, but we can talk about three very, very fast. One has to do with what
Yeah.
you just said. That's a developmental reason. We know children till
Mm.
7, 8, 9, probably 11 years have what we call egocentric thinking.
Mm.
And this means that literally the child's brain relates everything to himself. It's
Mm.
something he can't avoid doing. Jean Piaget and Babette Elder
Right.
studies part of, I would say, the basics of psychology. And we know that egocentric thinking doesn't start changing until 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years, probably. Okay, so
Mm.
initially there's this natural tendency for the child. But the
Mhm.
second reason, and this is a really important reason, is that when something bad happens to me, I need to feel, for me to again, this deregulates me.
Mhm.
And if I'm afraid of it happening again, I'm going to stay in this deregulated state. So for me to again start coming down, I have to be able to predict when this can happen again.
Mm.
Okay. And for me to predict it, I have to know what its cause is. And if I can't find any cause, any controllable cause, if I blame myself, this will give me a sensation of control and will help me regulate. So it's a
Mm.
trade off. I'll feel much worse because I'll blame myself. But because of me having blamed myself, I'll actually feel more secure and regulate. So this is what we see happens with all victims. A woman gets sexually assaulted, and
Mm.
unavoidably she'll start thinking she should have not gone in that street, she should have not worn whatever clothes she was wearing. And this is a way of her brain of trying to again feel in control. So this goes.
Mm.
That's why even adults blame themselves. And the third out of the six, and with these three, it's enough. They're the three
Mhm.
main ones, is attachment. Because for children to feel secure, they have to feel that their caretakers are good caretakers. If their
Mm.
caretakers are not good caretakers, this deregulates the child, puts them in a state of fear.
Right.
So, if the caretakers are the ones responsible for whatever traumatic events are happening, one of the worst things that can happen to a brave child or even an adult child is to think that this person is bad because this will keep me deregulated constantly.
Ah.
I have to think that this person is good and this will regulate me. So, if this person is good and he or she is doing bad things to me, why does this happen? Because
Mm.
I am bad. Okay.
Right.
This is what we call attachment to the perpetrator. Okay, and the higher the stress, the more
Mm.
traumatic the event, the more I will blame myself. So we have
Mm,
three reasons. We have three more, but these three are good enough to remember,
mhm,
and others are a bit more complex, that explain why victims of traumatic situations are going to blame themselves, and why
mm,
the self-concept is going to, suffer a lot. Uh, for
mm,
children, it's developmental, plus reduces uncertainty, gives me a sense of control, plus attachment to the
mm.
perpetrator. And
Right.
and you see it fits in with what we were talking about trauma. Trauma is deregulation. And this is
Mm,
the brain's quest constantly to regulate, to go back to homeostasis, manage to calm down. And the
mm.
simplest form is blame myself. So it's a fantastic trade-off. I'm an
Right.
awful person, but I am safe.
Mm. All these learned ways of being, and for all the listeners, just to maybe continue considering this, it's not your fault. It's
Those
not your fault. And there is really a hope, and there's ways of healing, there's ways of changing. May not happen overnight, but it's very possible. And I want to just ask you one more thing. Where you talked about emotional regulation, and it's one of the things that I experienced doing my own work. Before I became a counselor and a psychologist, doing my own work, and still do, experiencing that in session, but also doing things outside that can support my own emotional regulation, whether it's learning different breathing, meditation, and mindfulness for me has been something that has really supported me in getting tuned into my thoughts, to my feelings, to how my body is, and so it helped me really pause, taking pauses to create change, and that's really what inspired the name of the podcast, Pause to Elevate. How can I
days.
pause, right, to create change? What does pause mean to you? Pause to
Okay.
elevate.
So this is again very important what we're talking about right now. We talked about reacting and responding.
Mhm,
And responding means that whatever happens, you have a time to decide what you want to do.
mhm,
Okay, and this requires this inner space, where between me and the world.
mhm.
And this is not becoming avoidant, because when I have the space, I may realize that I'm being avoidant. You know what I mean? That
Right.
that react and avoidant.
To recognize.
Yeah, but I do need this inner space or space of conscience, and meditation has always, probably this is the main effect of meditating or doing mindfulness, is to
Mm,
create this inner space. And from there,
mm,
people, may want to connect with God or with this. Okay, that's fantastic.
mhm.
But actually, the first step is always creating this inner space. Okay,
Right.
and this inner space is going to help me, start transforming my reactions into responses. And if I was not lucky enough to grow up in really healthy environments where I learned how, to do this in a natural way, now, as we talked
Mm,
about, we'll have to do it in a probably longer way that has to do with being conscious of what's going wrong,
right.
and decodifying slowly by slowly and learning, to respond in a different way. And I feel the same as you. Meditation, mindfulness,
Mm,
create this inner space and
mm,
allow you to inhabit that space, start expanding it, and slowly by slowly, creating this buffer that allows you to respond to whatever is happening in the outer world, instead of just simply reacting. So in a way, it has a lot to do with
yeah.
what we're talking about. And what we see is that trauma patients, you've seen it too
Mm,
probably, find it very tough because they have a lot of difficulty creating this inner space. Again,
yeah.
because probably this inner space is very deregulated, or there's a lot of pain or
Mm,
painful memories, or many times just simply deregulation, or many
yeah.
times simply their strategy has been to avoid. Don't
Yes.
even feel bad, but they just can't. Okay, so this pause you're talking about, I think, is central. And
Mm,
I'm probably going to get a bit carried away, but I'll do it anyway. It's probably central to us being human.
mm,
Because probably being human is this: is not just reacting, but being able to respond. And to be able to respond, you have to be able to pause and
mm.
decide.
Yeah.
So I think this is central.
And sometimes the pause can be as simple as just take a breath for a moment.
Yes.
Like it doesn't, in a moment, as soon as we bring awareness. And this is what I found, as you said as well, sometimes it's difficult as I teach mindfulness. sometimes it's difficult for people to turn in, because if the pattern has been, let me not look inside, I want to avoid this feeling, I want to avoid looking in, it can be very uncomfortable to turn in. But then the possibility is we can become this warm, kind, compassionate container for ourselves. That's what I've experienced, and that's what inspired me to keep sharing this is, ah, I've changed the container within me so I can hold space for myself.
Exactly.
But it wasn't easy to get there. But it's worthwhile. This has been so informative, so enjoyable, and I'm wondering, anything else in your mind just before we wrap up?
Nothing I can think about, or we can go on for 2 hours.
We can literally. There might be a part two coming up. Who knows?
Love
But
it. I would love it.
so thank you so much. And where can people find you if they want to learn more about your work? And I'll put in the show notes.
Yeah,
Is it a
probably my
website or is it
webpage. I
social
think they
media?
can find me,
Yeah.
and we've got also an Instagram that functions quite a bit. That's Arun Mansukhani, psicólogos. That's psychologist in Spanish. And I would say these two: the web page, and now in fact we're remodeling it, so it'll probably be completely remodeled in a month or so, and the Instagram, probably these two.
Hmm. Great. So I'll put all of those in the show notes so people can find you and learn more about your work, and also your TEDx talk, which it's in Spanish, but there's subtitles, so it can. I found it very enjoyable too. So I really want to thank you for your generosity of time, and again joining us really late where you are in Spain.
But in
Time
Spain, it's
difference.
never late. Remember,
Yes, yeah, that's right. It's never late.
it's
We're
never too
just
late in
we're
Spain.
still right here on the same planet. Just the sun is, going down, and for us, the sun is fully awake. So thank you so much, and
Thank you
I
very
want to
much.
thank, really appreciate you, and I want to thank all the listeners for really taking the time to tune in and be curious about this possibilities of change and healing. And if you found this helpful and useful, feel free to share it. If you have a friend, if you have a neighbor or a colleague, feel free to share. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. It really helps me to continue doing these. Until then, may your moments continue to unfold with ease, and may you be present in as many of them. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Kasim, for this opportunity to talk to your audience. Thank you. Really enjoyed the talk, plus.
Thank you so much. Hello there, and thank you so much for stopping by this channel. I hope you find this content useful, and if you do, feel free to hit that subscribe button. It will really help me to reach to more people and keep this content going. Here we are journeying together, and let's see where this takes us.